Getting everything started today with our first presenter, I would like to introduce Tony Kukich. Kukich received his BFA from Bemidji State University and his MFA from Indiana University. He has held various academic positions at Indiana University, Interlochen Center for the Arts, Heron School of Art, Bemidji State University, Inver Hills Community College, and Normandale Community College. In addition to teaching, Kukich has had an incredibly active career as an exhibiting artist. He has shown his work in national exhibitions from the 80s to the present day. His work has earned him recognitions and awards from a variety of organizations, including independent galleries, academic institutions, and even the Minnesota State Fair. Without any further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to Tony. Tony, sorry about that. Just set up here.
Are you going to keep your mask on?
Oh, I think it's not.
Okay.
Slideshow here, and you are set.
Okay, this is going to start moving forward by itself, I think. Hi, I'm Tony Kukich, and everything that Sean said about me is correct. And I've taken this opportunity to look back as far as I possibly could in my art life. And I think I made it back to high school. I found some slides from high school. So we're going to start there. I was born and raised in Duluth in a really happy household. My dad was a barber, mom was a legal secretary, and I have 3 sisters. And it's a little confusing and entertaining to my family that I was an artist from the very beginning. I was that kid who was always drawing on everything. I grew up across the street from Lake Superior and about 2 blocks from the Lester River. So I was in the water all the time, outside all the time. When I was in high school, I fell in love with action painters of the 50s and 60s. And then I started doing watercolor, and I thought I was going to be a watercolorist. And in high school, we had a great program for painting and ceramics. And this is the first picture of ceramics that I made. I think I was a senior in high school. And I wasn't planning on going to college, but I was recruited as an athlete to dive at Bemidji State University. And believe it or not, Bemidji had a top 5 swimming and diving program for years and years. And they also had an extraordinary art department with a lot of world-class artists there. So I just lucked out and found a school that was pretty amazing. These are the first pieces that I ever showed. And I think I made them as a sophomore or a junior in college. And my instructor, who was Remus Viscerta at the time, encouraged me to start entering competitive shows. And I did, and I got in with these little tiny pots. I have no idea where they are. This is from college as well. At the end of Bemidji, to get your Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, you had to do an artist residence somewhere. And I didn't know how to find that. You had to find an artist yourself. And one of my professors had a job at Drake University in Des Moines, and he knew the artist in residence at the Des Moines Art Center. And so I got a gig there. And that's where these were made. And then this is the work that I showed for my BFA degree show. Some of the pieces. This is the old electric kiln at Bemidji. You see we have cherry red there. These are some more pots made in Des Moines. The imagery was fairly simple. My imagery has always been fairly simple and a little bit loose. And these are some drawings from the BFA show that I had as well. When people are trying to get degrees, they're usually forced to make a cohesive body of work, which was difficult for me because I was always popping around. And so I fell on the image of the cup just to represent ceramics, and the whole show was about cups, really. And these drawings that you see are on butcher paper because I really couldn't afford quality paper. And so I drew on a 30-inch wide roll of butcher paper with chalk. So that's the 2D part of that show. And then I was making cups and saucers like this, just a plate with a slab and a drawing. Really simple stuff. But I would encourage everybody to go back and look at their work because it really informs the work I'm making now a lot more than I thought it did. These are some cups stacked up for that show. I guess installation shots. And that's me, 22 years old, just graduating school. And then I had some teachers that encouraged me to go on and go to graduate school. And I wasn't sure how to do it. And I got some help and applied to schools and got in to a bunch of schools and landed at Indiana University. At the time, I really wanted to expand my horizons with my work, and there's a thing going around at the time, the idea of symbology, and I don't know if people are aware of that term, but it's kind of like making your own personal symbol dictionary or symbol language. And so that's what I was trying to do. I was just making these big flat things and drawing on them. They're about as thick as a brick. Clay was really cheap. So I was going through tons and tons of clay this first year, trying to figure out what to do. And just to show you how cheap clay was, that's how big the pieces were. So, and I have no idea where these are either. But it was a struggle, a struggling year. I knew I had 3 years, but I remember being nervous and not knowing what to do. So I was just drawing, really. Drawing on flat clay, stuff on the walls, and then I would slap up walls and paint on those. You'll see a couple cars in here, red car, blue car. One of the cars was mine. The other car was my girlfriend's at the time. And the airplane, I was, my last job before I went to graduate school was delivering lost luggage at the Des Moines International Airport. It's a thankless job, thankless. And that's that wall. All this time, I keep painting and drawing as well. This is a leftover piece of paper from my undergraduate days. I still had that roll of paper with me. And this is called the Arbutus Dance. There's a hall at Indiana University where we would do our critiques. And when there wasn't something going on in that hall, we would have dances on the weekends. Some painting about that. And this is another drawing from the time. Tempera, chalk. And I started a practice back then. Before every new body of work that I would make, I would do a self-portrait. It's kind of like a stretching out in the studio. And that's a portrait from that time, early in grad school. This is around the same time. Sometimes I didn't have paint. That's black slip on paper. And this is a drawing done on canvas that I had for wedging clay in my studio, you know, making slabs. Looks a little bit like David Letterman, I think. And I was making pots and drawing on them. I really wanted to make sculpture, but I had a hard time making the final leap into making objects. And so I was doing a lot of painting on pots, sort of a natural thing for me. It's a picture of me then, probably second year, with a couple of pots. And even now I look at these pots. I'm not crazy about them, but I recognize them. So lots and lots of pots. And then I started building off the pots. Still trying to figure out who I was. And I was lucky enough to be in a 3-year program and given the time to find my voice. And I think that's kind of what every artist wants to do. They want to find their voice. You know, you know your influences and you love your influences, but you don't want to make their work. You know, you want to make your own work. And I'm still trying to make my own work. I feel I'm a little closer now, but I still feel that way. And I don't know if everybody feels that way. But these are still some more pots from grad school, second year. Some platters. I love platters. You're going to see a lot of platters because it's like paper for me. You can get an idea of how big they are from the bricks. This is my sister's mantelpiece. And that's a studio shot from my second year. Confusing. It was a confusing time for me because the work I was making, although I felt okay about it, I felt like I didn't quite know where I wanted to go. And I was forcing imagery onto pieces that really didn't hold them all that well. And then I kind of got an idea that, well, maybe I'll build a freestanding thing, kind of like the wall that I slapped up, you know, with those drawings on it. And but spend a little bit more time on the outline of this thing and being a little bit more pointed about the imagery that's going to eventually go on there. And they were two-sided. And I really, really love these things now that I found them again. And I think somebody put me off this idea, either from a critique or a professor. I'm not sure, I can't remember. But now that I look at them, I really wish that I had spent more time with them. And I've got a few pieces. And so this is the very end of my second year. And it's a sort of a pivotal time for me. There's another one, happy, not so happy. But that's the other side. So having a nice shower, not so good. And then this is stewardess. We don't call them stewardesses anymore. What do we call them?
Flight attendant.
Thank you. Flight attendants, and this is Kukich Airways, and then another shower scene. And this is one of the few that I think made it all the way through the kiln. And at the time, I think one of the requirements was that we did like one academic class a term. And this was, I did a sub-Saharan African art history class, and I was really taken by the graphic quality of some of the pottery that I saw there. A lot of black and white lines and geometry. And so I think these are influenced by that. That's the other side of that same piece. And then there's this is like the last one of that series. I think this was for some critique at school, and I think after that I just kind of stopped with these. That's the other side. And so this is human size, like, you know, I don't know how tall, 5.5 feet maybe, and you can see a seam right around the elbow of the blue figure, and it's cut. And so it was built, the bottom was built bisque, and then I built the top on top of that. And anything that was this big and it had a naked woman on it would be stolen from the studio. It always happened. It was like a big it was like the studios were the old ROTC buildings that were abandoned on campus. They turned them into studios for graduate students. Doors were never closed. There was no door on the building, I don't think. And the common area where all the chemicals and everything where we would store our big stuff that we couldn't keep in our studio. And like I said, if there was a figure on it, they would end up in a fraternity, I think. So that's where this is, probably. And this is the very largest piece I made from that time. So that's the very end of my graduate school. Those are 4 separate pieces. They're pinched up forms. Then I made all these tiles, broke them up, glued them on there, and these were deadly. You had to wear a leather apron and leather gloves to move them around because they were like covered in razor blades. They got into it got into a show in Chicago, a really good show. A friend of mine, we packed him in his truck, drove him up to the show. Then I had to go back and get it because it didn't sell. And my friend had graduated school at that time, and all I had was my little car. And so I drove up there and I took them one at a time in the trunk of my car to the nearest dumpster. So they went in 4 different dumpsters in Chicago. So that's in a landfill in Chicago somewhere. That's the other side. So you've got she's wrestling the fish. Now he's wrestling the fish with the vignette on the end. So that year I got a job, a summer job at Interlochen Center for the Arts. And I was really worried about my 3rd year because that's the big year, you know, you have to get all your work together and you want it, the word cohesive again, you want a cohesive work, you want to wow your people, you want to get out of school. And I didn't know what to do. I knew I wanted to make sculpture. I still didn't know how I wanted to do it. But this summer was a time of real fun for me because I was working with 13-year-old kids. And I learned several things that summer. The most important was that I didn't want to work with 13-year-old kids for a job. But it was fun at the same time. So I was a diver in college and I used some of this imagery and some of the verbiage, the language from diving in some of my work. In diving, the trick, the top of the dive is called the top. You've got the entry, of course. And when divers talk about a good entry, they'll say good feet or bad feet, or a good top, bad feet, things like that. And that's what these little deals are about. Blue water, bad feet. This is good feet. And during the summer, I just played. This is a baseball pitcher, milk pitcher. And I drew some surreptitious portraits of other faculty members. And that's a little pot I really like. I don't know where it is anymore. And so I just made some pots that summer and decorated on them. This is called Leda and the Duck. If you know Leda and the swan in mythology, where the Zeus turned into a swan, had sex with Leda. That's what this is about. But at Interlochen, they didn't have swans, they had ducks, and they were angry ducks. So this is Leda and the Duck. And well, I can't go forward and backward anymore.
Someone tried to join the meeting. I'm guessing it just popped out of the.
Oh, I see.
There we
Oh,
go.
okay, cool. And this is another angry duck with party hat. It was kind of a carefree summer. And here's a portrait of one of my students. And she was lovely, friendly, and then not so friendly. This is a 13-year-old girl pot. And at the school, like every school, you have sales once in a while. And when I make things for sales at schools, I would make souvenir plates. So there's a souvenir plate from Interlochen. That's the angry duck plate. This is called radical departures. This is another plate. It's a radical departure because this was a sexist school. And at the school, you had uniforms. I had to wear a blue shirt and dark blue pants. All the boys did too. And all the girls wore blue shirts, dark blue skirts, and they were color coded by their socks. So, you know, from one age to one age, they would have red socks. Another age that they would all be color coded, which I thought was pretty weird. And that's the student parking lot where the parents' weekend, I guess you call it. And this was my favorite student. His name was Glenn Turnipseed. And at Interlochen, which is a music school, the very exclusive music school, you were either extremely gifted musically, you were really, really rich, or you were ward of the state. Those are the kids that went to the school. And Glenn was a ward of the state and not very popular with the other kids. I'm sure he was on the spectrum somewhere, but really creative kid. And he could fix Walkmans. This is back in the time of the Walkman, and he could fix them. So eventually the kids thought he was all right. And I was making some more sculptural things, trying to discover what to do. And then this happened. It's a little boat that I made bisque at that school and brought back to graduate school with me. And this was the beginning of me thinking sculpturally. And it's a really, really important piece to me. And I still have, it's one of the very few that I have from back then. And it means a lot to me. It was, the impetus came from an assignment I gave the kids. And the assignment was, if you didn't have to be here, because most of them did not want to be there. If you didn't have to be here, what would you be doing in the summertime? And then I thought, well, I should do this assignment too. Well, when I was 13 or 14 years old, I spent all my time at Park Point, you know, at the lake. And up Park Point, it's all about boats and ships. And I spent a lot of time in the shipyards drawing, doing watercolors and stuff. And so that it was a natural for me. And then I got back to school, and this is the portrait I made then. And then I started making these ships, trying to figure them out, trying to figure out what my rap was going to be, what my, you know, how I was going to defend this work, what's it about. And I kind of was thinking about, you know, the ship representing something, you know, my old symbology days, and then the smoke representing something else, you know, something that was hidden, making itself apparent. And that was the beginning of my idea. And I was doing everything with these ships. I was changing their aspect, making them sink, lighting them on fire, putting them up on the ways, they're called, the dry docks. And then I started thinking about things even more sort of metaphorically. This piece is called Output, and these are built in a size that's comfortable for me, meaning they're really unwieldy to move around and fire. So this is probably from that tip to the front is maybe somewhere between 3 or 4 feet. So that's kind of how big they are. They're kind of like human size. And that's nice for everything but moving, you know. This is called Jester's Trinity. Around this time, there were some oil spills happening as well. And I was starting to make the smoke. This is when I was just starting to tentatively change smoke into something else. And I made some that were pull toys. Those are press molded plantains. This is called Banana Tug. And that's another pull toy. I don't remember the title from back then. My grandmother died around this time. My grandmother was Croatian and spoke mostly Croatian. This is called Laka Noć, which means good night in Croatian. And And that's a close-up of the top of that smoke in that one. Press molded flowers and leaves. And then the boat started disappearing, and then this was just the stack from the boat. And trying to get some movement. And then the boat ended up on top of the smoke. This is called the single screw mini. And when they describe boats, big boats, a lot of times they'll describe them using how many propellers they have. So this, they would say that the single screw name of the boat came from blah, blah, blah. So that's where this idea came from. And then I made a bigger one that looked almost figurative. And this is called Triple Screw Giant. And they used to refer to the Titanic as the Triple Screw Giant when they're writing about the Titanic. I always thought that was a really nice turn of phrase. And then figures started coming out of the boats, and the boats became more stylized. So this is all the third year of grad school, and I'm feeling really good. Things are starting to make sense for me. These are some of the later pieces. And then they got even weirder. This is probably the biggest of all of those pieces, built in 3 pieces, fired separately and then stacked up. This is called cockle. And do you know what a cockle is? A cockle is a bivalve. It's like like a clam. And when they refer to the cockles of your heart, they're referring to the valves in your heart. That's a little tidbit for you. And that's straight on of that same guy. A little bit imposing, I think. And at that time, I started another practice of drawing my pieces after I made them. And not just sketches, but drawings. And I had sketches of this piece before I built it, Jester's Trinity. And then I spent time making a serious drawing about it. And the size of drawing that I generally draw on is a full sheet of paper, which is about 30 by 40. So that's about how big these are. That's the most comfortable size for me to draw on. And there's a sort of a drawing of Lacanoche. There's one of the banana tug. And I cannot remember the name of that piece, but I love that drawing. I can't read it. And then school's over. This is one of the last drawings I made from school. And if you look at the bottom, it says DD 4.0. DD in diving stands for degree of difficulty. And at the time, before I stopped diving, that was the highest degree of difficulty, 4.0. And I had one dive that was that. So anyway, that's a reference to school. And then I was off again, and my car was the red car. This is one of the last drawings from that time. And I got my first teaching gig in Indianapolis at IUPUI, which is in Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. So it was a satellite school for the big state schools. And then they had an art department that was centrally located at the Indianapolis Art Institute. It was called the John Herron School of Art. And so you'd get students from both schools would go there. This is one of the pieces I made during that time. This is a self-portrait called You Must Be Barb's Boy. My mom collected clowns. She didn't really collect clowns, but we had a painting of a clown in the house, and somebody thought my mom liked clowns, and they started bringing her figurines, and then it caught on, and then we had a house full of clowns. And so there you go. And this is about my girlfriend at the time. She's kind of wanting to get married. This is another piece from the time. upside down head. This is called spectral ruse. And this is a corp gesture. I did a lot of corp gestures, like corporation, right? C-O-R-P. I did a lot of images around that name. And like I said, I think it was the Valdez that made me think that way. And I think this is the one of the last two busts I made there. These are the biggest pieces, human busts I think I've ever made. This is a corp gesture as well. Press molded, black iron pipes, right? And then there's this piece. This is a piece. This is a portrait of a guy who worked in the building that I worked in at Heron School of Art. He was newly married, and he and his wife were trying to find a home to purchase, and they were getting a lot of trouble from realtors. They had a hell of a time getting a house. That's what this piece is about. And that's a close-up of the hair. Right? Same leaves and flowers, press molded. And then here's some souvenir plates from the Christmas sale at the Heron School of Art. Handmade Heron School of Art, right? The cock, there was some chickens and animals running around there. This is called Wander, Indiana. That was the state motto of the time, Wander, Indiana. Just some plates. And then I was off, that job was done. I was off somewhere else. I got a job at my old alma mater for a while. And a dear friend of mine died during this time, neighborhood mom. In my neighborhood, we were very close, several families, very close. And the moms were all moms to us. And this mom, her name was Trudy Morgenstern, died of lung cancer. They all smoked. Everybody smoked then. She died of lung cancer. She lost a lung, and I didn't get to see her for the last year. It was all in the hospital. She's a very influential person in my life, and this whole body of work is about that experience. When I was there, this is what I was thinking about when I was making sculpture there. It's probably the smallest piece, little piece. And this is when I really started feeling confident about the direction my work was taking. I was feeling more like myself, and really happy then. Not really happy about losing my friend, but really happy about the work that came from that. I think she would have been happy about it too. And so these, again, like I said, they're on that scale that's comfortable for me to work in and unwieldy to move. Redhead. She was a redhead. And these are some drawings from the same period, from the same show. I cannot remember the titles of these drawings, but I do remember how I felt then. I felt very powerful and content in my work. Last drawing from that grouping, and then I think I'm off somewhere else again. In the studio, that last body of work was exhausting emotionally and otherwise. And so I started working small after some encouragement from some people. And this is a portrait of one of my students' sons. And this is called Shithead. And I've made several shitheads over the years, but this is the first one. And so, and it's one of my favorite little figures. This is another little figure from the time. And I suppose they're like 11 inches tall or something. Really nice to move around. This is a drawing. Some of the symbology entering back into my drawings. And then I moved to a place where I didn't have access to a ceramic studio. My life changed pretty drastically. It was focused more on work and trying to make a living than it was making art. But I carved out a place for myself in the house I was living in, and I did a lot of painting then. And I was hanging a lot of wallpaper at the time. And when I would end a job, I would save the paper, and then I would mount it to my sheets of paper, and I'd paint on that. That's what this is. This is a portrait of my dad. That's a portrait of Barb. That's my mom in one of her more pensive moments. And that's my dad behind her, Barb and Dan. Self-portrait again. Getting into this new body of work. This is a self-portrait of me at a wedding, a family member and a bunch of nieces and nephews. That's the woman that was in my life at the time on the dock. This is her sister. And she's just like that. And this is her other sister. These are lovely people that are still in my life. And this is a man named Jesse Andriano, who was or Giuseppe Andriano, who was a tailor in Des Moines, and gave me my first espresso in his shop. This is my cousin Mary Ann, self-portrait, or I mean a portrait. And then this is one of the last of this group that I did, and this is a portrait of a dear friend's father who died, and he was a really interesting man. His name was Gordon Morris. We called him Dr. Gomo because that's how he would get restaurant reservations. He'd always call himself doctor. He thought it got him better reservations. And he loved bugs. So anyway, lovely man. And then you may recognize these people. These are ceramic people, friends of mine. That's Sandy Simon and Bob Brady. So that's an old picture, you know, old drawing of that. And that's Trudy Morgenstern, my dear neighborhood mom. And then another self-portrait, because I'm moving on again into a whole another idea. And that's what this is. These works are more abstracted. And that's another self-portrait from the same time period. And so for the longest time, I was without a ceramic studio. And then a friend called up and said, hey, I've got some money to do artist residency. Do you want to come and do a week in the studio? Are you still making ceramics? And I go, yeah. And so I got back in the studio, and that's when I realized I needed it. I really needed to have it in my life. And these were made then from that little residency that I did. These are plant stands, you know, for big pots. Love salt firing. And then I got a job as to do spatula replacement here in the cities. My partner at the time didn't want to travel anymore, so I wasn't really doing any teaching gigs. And so this is from when I taught at Normandale for a year. And I was really happy to get this job. It was really fun to get back in the studio, although that's kind of how I was feeling at the time. That's the back of that platter. I also made some bottles then. At that school, they have a really nice little facility, and they have a giant gas kiln that was never fired. Big guile kiln. And I asked her if I could use it. And that's what happens to earthenware in gas firings with a little bit of reduction sometimes. And I love the effect of that. Another bottle from the same time down in Normandale. Another bottle. And one of the best parts of that job is having keys to the studio and being able to go there on the weekend with my daughter. And she's a budding artist now. She's 24 and extraordinary kid with unlimited potential. And this is a nurse she made at the at Normandale. One of my favorite things she ever made. So I would throw plates during the week and then just lay them out, get a bunch of underglazes and let her paint away. And this is one of the pieces that I made during that time, that stay. I was making things in a little bit more realistic scale. And this piece is in a museum in Croatia, of all places. And so I started working really small again. So this is about 5 inches. The little more figures. If you look, this is Joan, and if you look, that's Pope Paul II she's standing on. I don't have a close-up of that. This is a golden shithead. So this is another in that long line of shitheads. More small figures, and the boat comes back. And this is probably my favorite landscape of all time. It's called London Road, and you could put it in your pocket. Some more figures. That was a request from Frankie. She wanted a mermaid. So that's Frankie's harpy. And this is called Golden Barb. I use my mom a lot in my work. And these, I think these are the last 2 small figures I've made. These are fairly recent. Another redhead. And now I'm just going to blow through a bunch of pottery. Am I like going over my time? Okay. I'm just going to show you that I make pots too. And I like making pots, like, you know, I mean, straight ahead pots, like useful. I love pottery. It's like, it's one of the wonderful things about ceramics, you know, being a ceramic sculptor, and you can make useful things. It's just it's just awesome. I mean, I think that's why I stick with ceramics. So I'm going to go through a bunch of cups. And then these are all very recent. This is from now on, it's all very recent stuff. I love carving on leather hard stuff. And I get these cups fairly dry and then carve on them. A lot of natural stuff. I love the scale of them. I don't feel like I have to invest my soul into them. I can just play with these things, and I have a really great time doing it. And inventing. This is now we're into the digital age, so the pictures aren't quite as mushy as the last ones I had. That's Pete Volkus, by the way. That's old Pete Volkus. Sometimes I turn drawings into decals and use them. Sometimes I use decals just, you know, as design elements. I love decals. I have a really nice collection of decals. I started back when I was an undergraduate in school. Back then, they would have ceramic businesses. You could go get a piece of bisqueware, decorate it, bring it back, they fire it for you. And then you could buy decals there too. And they would have like file cabinets full of decals. And when those businesses would go out of business, they want to sell all their stuff. And if you were there at the right time, get some great decals. Some tell stories, some are just playful. This is the last cup, I think. And then I'm going to show some bowls, and we all know bowls are difficult to take slides of, but I have a few bowls to show. pouring bowl. Inside. Another pouring bowl inside. These are porcelain. Some pictures. There's a tornado picture. Fairly simple forms. There's one for your grandmother's cabinet. And I have cats. I've always had cats and I love cats. So that's a decal in China paint. Another decal in China paint. That's the other side of that particular picture. This is an unrequited love picture. So that's him dreaming of her. And this is her dreaming of a ball of string. And that's a portrait picture. And then I also do teapots, you know, and for those potters out here, it's one of the most difficult forms because there's so much going on. They're hard to pull off and do well. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of this when it was finished. This was before it got decorated. I think they would get decals on them or little China paintings on them. Or that's a teapot, another teapot, and another teapot. And now we'll move on to another form that I really like, the butter dish. And these are round butter dishes. They're not oval. And so I'll use some of the press molds that I have made for my sculptures and make handles and all kinds of stuff with it. This is one of my, you know, for a little lidded, you know, pot. It's pretty fun to make. So butter dishes. And now I'm going to zoom through a bunch of lidded jars. These are small ones. These are like salt jar size. It's a salt jar in my house. Some other little ones. I like motorcycles. I collect scooters. Salt or sugar jar. Now the jars are getting a little bit bigger. And this is my sugar jar. And now we're getting into maybe a cookie jar size. Inside or outside lid, inside lid. Cookie jars. I don't have a whole lot to say about these. But I love making pots. That's probably the biggest one. And Maiolica, I don't know how many of you work with Maiolica, but that's really fun, you know. Noisy, bright, exciting, playful. So I have a bunch of jars with that. That's probably the last one I made. And then I also like baking dishes and servers, right? Like small, these are like little ramekins kind of, they're oval. And this is a teeny tiny one. It's a little bit bigger one. I don't know if people would bake in this, but it would be perfectly fine to bake in. And so this one actually has several pictures of, so you kind of see what they look like. Kind of hard to take a picture of an oval piece too. And I like kind of wobbly deals. With this little low server. It's another little server. And then plates. I'm gonna show you a bunch of platters. All of these platters are in the size that I like to decorate on. And they're anywhere between 16 and 20 inches, you know, so you can use your arms, not just your hands. And I finish most of the back of my plates with the same energy that I do the front of them. I kind of have a thing about that. Finishing the piece. So that's the back of it, but I'm not going to show the back of every platter. So these are some old Maiolica platters. And a little bit of that symbology. And mostly just decoration. Carving. And these are fairly recent. Firing at stoneware temperatures, you know, I'm firing it at home between 6 and 8, cone 6 and 8, like that. And unless it's Maiolica, of course, and they're earthenware. People I know, platter, that's hanging on our shed. Nature platter. Irritating fly. Coneflower platter. And this is one of the symbols that holds some meaning for me. A wireframe drawing of a cube, right? It's called a Necker cube. That's what that is called, a Necker cube. And it's an interesting thing because you can change its perspective in your brain. And I always found that fascinating, you know. Another portrait of Barb. This is her high school yearbook picture. That's where I got that image. Grasshopper in flowers and a mosquito in roses. And then I also make little flower pots. And this is a little bit more formal sort of exercise. But yeah, this little flower pot, tubes. That's the other side. There's a series of these. So it's China paint and decals. Excuse me. So that's the negative, that's positive of those images. You can see the face on there. And the face on there. And this is a winter summer flower pot. That's winter. That's summer. So you go, ooh, yay. And then I found these decals, these really big birds of prey decals, and I've had them in my decal stash for a long time. And I finally used them. This is one side of that flower pot. This is the other side. One side of this flower pot and the other side. And I can't tell you what these birds are, other than I really like them. There's that Necker cube up there. And now I'm getting back into the studio. We're almost done. I'm getting back into the studio, and I've had some ideas in my head. Two main ideas. One, I want to start working off the wall more instead of freestanding stuff. And two, I'm not sure what I want to make work about. These are the things that are going around in my brain. And so I got down in the studio and I made this. This is a few years ago. And this had been bouncing around in my head. It's obviously a two-piece piece. And the smoke is vaguely, you know, anthropomorphic. And I really like that the oddness of that it's a figure, but it's not a figure. And I had hesitated to use the imagery that I'm going to show you now because I thought it was a little too personal. But my partner, who's here now, has a genetic anomaly which causes cancer. Let's just say it like that. And consequently, it's a weird cancer. They don't know how to deal with it. They throw every drug at it that they can. And so there's been a lot of suffering in her life. And it's something that I really didn't want to use for work. And then I started thinking about it, and I thought, you know, the only way I can say this is there's been beauty in the experience. It's not all bad, you know, and I just love her so much. And so these are about that. It's kind of heavy, but the work makes a lot of sense to me. This is probably in the 30 to 40 inch range from top to bottom. And it's two pieces. The bottom one's bolted up in there and it hangs on the wall. You know, it's vaguely viscera hanging down. And then this is the top where the neck is. That's the decal on top. So you've got the piece and they've got that up there. Kind of a little treat. And then this is another one. This is the biggest from this whole series that I did about her things. Let's see if I can do this again. There we go. That is a detail of that. The blush that you see on that pink glaze is from that green glaze that's rolling down on the pink. And it's reactive at this temperature because of lithium. So I don't know if you guys have dealt with lithium, but lithium is sort of a mid-temperature, beautifully magic material. And years ago, you could get it for $1 a pound powdered. And now, because of the battery situation in cars, I don't even know how much. The last time I bought it was $100 a pound. I don't know what it is now, but I'm guessing it's around there.
It's currently 125.
Yeah,
Just right for
it's just
some reason.
miserable. It's just absolutely miserable. It drives me. By the way, do you have any of that here in the studio?
We do not. I've got a personal supply that I bought like 10
Yeah.
years ago,
So
but
anyway,
even that is dwindling quickly.
it's lovely because it's one of the few materials that's reactive, like to all kinds of things. And it's one of the things that can give you a surprise at these temperatures. And this is one of those wonderful surprises. Okay, so that's that one. I'm going to see if I can move forward again. This is a smaller piece. So these are, everything's on the wall here, except for something towards the end. This is called, what is that called with your fingers, Aim? This is called neuropath. Yeah, and it's referring to neuropathy, the losing of the feeling in your extremities. That, and also these red feet. It's about heat, but it's also about this cute woman. This is called Salvation Skirt. Amy's a real junker, and she loves fine stuff at Salvation Army. That's what that is. That's a close-up of that. And this is called Tube Change. Got that necker cube in there, you can see it. And here's a close-up of that. That green glaze, that's all because of lithium. So is that blue glaze. And that's a super reactive glaze. And if you fire it a second time to the same temperature, it'll do that. Yeah. So I've got like 3 pounds of lithium left before I turn into a painter again. So there's a close-up of the decal. These are decals that I had designed and then had made. So those are scooter engines. This is called Green Jumper. And that is close up of the body. And it has like a dark green glaze and then maybe 3 or 4 layers of pearlescent luster. One of the simpler pieces, a close up of that. It's called semicolon. And then the way I work, if you hang around, you'll see how I work. I make a lot of parts and then I play with them, and if I have a very specific idea of what I want to do, that won't have a lot of parts, but I always make extras. And the extras, sometimes I make like I take breaks from the work I'm making, and I make something else. And this is a series called Brule Respite, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a respite from me, from the serious work that I was doing with the sculpture. And it refers to a place that I like to go and be alone. And I still make these. There's a bunch in this series. So this is called Brule Respite. I think this is the first one. There's a detail of it. Another Brule Respite, probably number 2. But these refer to very specific places too on the river that I spend time. I have certain trees that I look at. And these are some single trees from the same series, Brule Respite series. This is one of my favorites. And there's a close-up of that, top of that tree. Get an idea. And then I started working on freestanding stuff again. And this is from the same series, the same Brule Respite series. There's another one of those decals I was telling you about. And there it is, the sort of the frontal shot. And now the work has morphed. Although it's about the same thing, it's about more. There's more going on in my work. And I don't know how other people think about their work, but as my work becomes a little bit more abstract, it's a little bit more difficult for me to describe. And I find that eventually it makes sense to me. If it's really good and I don't understand it, if it's around long enough, I figure it out. And I think that's the best kind of work. That's the other side of that piece. It's called Dangle. And then these are the last 2 pieces, the last 2 major pieces I made. This is called Blue View. And there's kind of a 45-degree angle shot. There's a close-up of the bottom. There's a 45 from the other angle. And then there's a picture of that press molded thing on the bottom. There's another decal of that, or detail of that piece. Blue View. And then this is probably the last one. And this is called Morning Heat. And there again is one of those lithium glazes on the bottom I was telling you about. All velvet underglaze on the top. All that is just velvet underglaze and then glaze. And that is Morning Heat, and that is the end of my lecture.